everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create. And if you'd like to join us live, you'll find the schedule for upcoming sessions on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions posted to the Happiness Hour YouTube channel. My guests share their photography tips and insight into their creative journeys. They inspire us to try something new and encourage us to look at a subject a little differently. Tonight's guest is Kevin Hoag. Kevin Kevin is a Texas-based photographer who has a diverse interest in a range of subjects from travel, wildlife, and motorsports for photography, but he's becoming a bona fide bird photographer. In tonight's presentation, a photographer's perspectives on aging, maintaining the joy, Kevin will share stories of his photography journey as the challenge of aging, and COVID lockdowns brought about transitions in his photography. You can connect with him through his website, kevinlhoagphotography.com. So with that, welcome to the Happiness Hour, Kevin.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Let me get my slides.
Wait a minute. Why do people rush to the slides? Let me interrogate you for just a second as I stumbled all over your intro. Have you already shared? Yeah, why don't you take that down a second? Okay, first of all, it's really hard to stalk somebody when they don't have an about page. So what did I miss? Is there something else that you want to slip in that I didn't cover?
I'll actually, as part of my presentation, I'll slip in a lot more background and connections and what have you. So,
all right, then I'll let you do that. With that, go ahead and share your screen.
All right. I'm trusting that the screen has come up and is visible to everyone.
It's perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Linda, for inviting me to speak on the Happiness Hour. And thank you all for taking some time to attend this presentation. I hope that what I talk about is helpful to you. My title, again, of a photographer's perspective on aging, maintaining the passion. I think in my earlier announcements, it said maintaining the joy. I'll treat that as synonymous. I just made that slight edit. I gave my contact information here, and my primary contact for photography, at least for showing my work, is my website listed on the bottom of this slide. I do also have an Instagram page, and if you search on my name, you'll find it. Here is Kevin Hoag Photography, but I struck it through, and the reason is that I really don't use it. And so it's still up. There are still photographs there, but it hasn't been updated in a long time. And maybe if enough people try to convince me, I might continue to use it or use it again. I know Linda is pretty emphatic about its value, and I get busy with other things. I have all I can do to keep my photography site up. If anything, it's changing all the time. If anything, I'm guilty of not culling well enough. So there's typically more information or more photos there than there probably should be. But that's my primary site. I've also put my email here as I encourage people that if there's something about this presentation that interested you, something that struck a chord with you, feel free to shoot me an email. It's a university email. I'm emeritus from University of Wisconsin, and as an emeritus, I get to keep my email and a few other perks. So that's my primary email. So I wanted to start with a few perspectives on the title. When I talk about aging, I started thinking about this and go, oh my, do I really want to talk about this? Some days it's rather depressing to even think about. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time just describing a little bit more what I mean by that or what I'm going to emphasize. There's a lot of different things we could talk about. Each one is probably worthy of an entire session. I'm not volunteering for all of those topics, but there's many topics worthy of discussion. if you go out on the internet and you start interacting with people on photography sites that talk about aging, probably the topic that comes up most is camera and lens weight. What's the weight of the kit, and what happens, in your photography as it gets kind of heavy for us. Um, I'm not going to talk about that at all. It's not an issue for me, and I put yet with a question mark. I fully aware that it could become so, but I still shoot. I shoot with the Nikon Z9 primarily, and I'm often shooting. I do a lot of bird photography, as Linda mentioned, and so often a 800 millimeter lens, and I do shoot mostly handheld. So I'm carrying fairly big kit. And oftentimes, if I'm out with it, I'm carrying two cameras and putting a 100 to 400 on a Z8 as my second camera. So as I say, it's not yet an issue for me, and there's a lot of other people talking about it. One that doesn't get talked about a lot is eyesight. And we all, even if we're maintaining our eyesight as we age, there are things that change. My glasses prescription hasn't changed, but I have a lot more difficulty with computer screens as time goes on. So I am noting differences. Um, and I really notice it in my post processing. If I have an image I really care about, I need to zoom in and walk my way through the image and look for things that, spots, if there's a dust spot or just a bright place on the image that I don't want to grab people's eye. I used to be able to see that really easily, and now I have to be much more conscious about it. What I am going to talk about are two things. One is just more general physical limitations. I'm historically I'm an avid hiker, backpacker, camper. I would go on long treks into the mountains or into different country. I've always had an interest in wildlife photography, and but physical limitations are catching up. And one of the challenges I have, to be very honest at this point, is if I'm going to get down low, how many times when you're talking to people about wildlife photography, oh, get down low, get to the level of the small critters. If I'm going to get down low, I better have a plan in advance of how I'm going to get back up. And my wife has taught me some yoga positions that have helped, but that's still, I've got to be really careful with that. Just thinking about that. And then the other aspect for me, certainly physical limitations. I've got to think about the distance I travel and how much additional things I'm carrying along. And then for me, reduced travel. I did a lot of my photography historically. I've done a lot of travel photography, and my interest was really piqued by doing a lot of travel nationally and internationally through my work. And it was real easy often to tack on a few extra days and do take some vacation time and do some photography. And now I'm semi-retired. I've retired from the University of Wisconsin, the emeritus title I referred to. I still work 3 days a week. I'm based in San Antonio, Texas, and I'm working as a researcher in engineering 3 days a week, but really not traveling at nearly the level I had before. And so any travel I do is really personal travel, and that's just a lot less. So I'm not going as far or doing it as often. So really, my focus tonight is on how my photography is changing and how I'm thinking about really doing things I can be passionate about while not taking the long hikes, not doing as much international travel. And so that really is what I'll be addressing a bit more. This slide's a little bit scary, and I could easily spend way too much time on it. I actually put this together for a presentation I did at a local camera club a couple of years ago. But it's just trying to kind of summarize, who I am and what my background is. With thanks to the Grateful Dead, it really has been a long, strange trip. But it starts over in the upper left hand. Well, it starts on the left-hand side. I went away to college in 1973 to study engineering. It was my first time away from home, and I got terribly homesick. Really had a tough time my first semester. And I think to keep me in school, my mom bought me a Yashica Electro 35 GS, which was a new rangefinder 35 millimeter camera at the time. It had wonderful optics, and it's actually one of the cameras that's fairly popular with young people that have kind of this resurgence of film photography. I'm actually thinking I'd love to get one of that. I didn't keep the camera. I always had to trade in or sell my equipment as I moved to something else. So I don't have it, but I absolutely fell in love with taking pictures with that camera, and the passion was ignited. Um, I never was all that crazy about engineering. I really don't care for mathematics to this day, and it's hard to be an engineer without caring more for mathematics. So I almost switched to English from my university major, and I was actually enjoying my photography so much that I seriously considered trying to become a professional wildlife photographer. And really, I think some things have never changed. I decided not to do that because I couldn't figure out how I'd make a living at it. Same story I think a lot of people face today. So I stayed in engineering. I did find a particular field that really interested me. So my bottom column is kind of going along there. I wound up studying combustion, and you do a lot of optical diagnostics, laser optics and stuff with that. So I actually learned some of the geeky end of optics, and that was helpful along the way with the photography. So on the bottom end is my work stuff. I kept doing. My big goal was I wanted to be able to change lenses, which I couldn't really do with the rangefinder camera. So as soon as I was able, I went to a single lens reflex camera, and continued on that path, shooting film. And my work was taking me to lots of places, a lot of international travel. And I was, as I say, tacking on side trips and being able to enjoy the different cultures and different places. And when I could, go shoot some wildlife as well. But it was kind of falling to the side. I was actually late to digital. And in 2007, which is several years after people were starting to go to digital cameras, I was still shooting my 35 millimeters on a film camera and was assuming I was going to stay with it. But I needed to go to India for work. And I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of time for photography. I didn't have the opportunity to add any extra days or anything. And so I didn't want to carry along my film camera and my lenses. And so I borrowed my wife's Nikon Coolpix point and shoot digital camera and got absolutely hooked. Had so much fun taking digital pictures and getting really excited about the concept of a digital darkroom. And so I came back and I immediately then bought my first digital camera. About that time or shortly afterwards, I discovered a website called PhotoSig. That some of you may have heard of it. It disappeared just a couple of years later, sadly. It was a serious critique site. It was professionals and amateurs. It was not just a show your work site, it was a critique site. You put up pictures and put on your thick skin and be prepared to really get a serious critique. And in return, you had to critique others. I found that site amazing. It really changed my photography. It taught me how to critique. It taught me just so much about composing a photo, working with color, and the technical aspects. And so I really missed that site. PhotoSig, SIG was Special Interest Group. And it was a free website, very popular, but was the people that had started it couldn't keep up with the management and decided to shut it down. So I'll finish up this slide with just some quick, there's a lot of arrows bouncing back and forth. I continued teaching at university in combustion, laser optics, diagnostics, what have you. I started teaching advanced digital photography. And I started doing a little bit of commercial work. I'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. I was a technical geek and decided to switch to mirrorless as soon as I could. But it was really when mirrorless was first coming out, I felt like it was not yet ready for prime time. I didn't care for it very much. I felt that my DSLRs were doing way better for what I needed. And so I switched back, sold my mirrorless kit, switched to DSLR. And then only much later, I'm now fully mirrorless, but that has only been in the last couple of years as the camera technology has, I think, caught up to what I was looking for. So where am I today? I joke with people, and I often say that my real hope is to become the next Vivian Maier. Now, if you're not familiar with who that is, she was a nanny in Chicago that carried a camera around a lot, and only after her death, someone bought a storage unit that you can buy these storage units that are unclaimed, sight unseen, and somebody bought this storage unit, and it was hers, and it was just filled with amazing street photography and a lot of undeveloped pictures. And she was working as a nanny, never hid her interest in photography. She always carried a camera along. She did interact with professional photographers, but she really didn't go out of her way to share her work. And I have to put myself in the same category. So my other eccentricity is I have an absolute personal rule that I enter no contests. And I'm not trying to sell that to anybody else. I call it an eccentricity. I'm not trying to say there's any real, why would you not do that? It's just me. It's not a recommendation. I can only sum it up by saying it keeps photography absolute zero stress. I never think about what a judge thinks of my photo or why the judges chose one photo over another and why mine didn't get chosen or anything. I just don't want to deal with that. And I really don't have a lot of interest in trying to get my work out there. So it's a little bit different, but that's kind of me. Okay, we mentioned Nickonians earlier. The other part about me right now, Nickonians is a worldwide online organization of primarily, but not exclusively, Nikon photographers. It's professionals and amateurs. They're from all over the world. And it's there's discussion threads, opportunities to share pictures, to ask questions of one another. And I find it to be a really respectful site, a site where people are genuinely there to help. And even though I don't think I've met anyone that's an active Nickonian in person, but I've really developed some friendships. And in the introductions, you'll note a couple of the people that are online tonight that have joined the room are friends of mine from Nickonians. So I've been on the site, I can't remember how many years, 2016, 2017, something like that is when I joined. And recently I really wanted to kind of up my participation. I've enjoyed the site so much that I am now part of the I would say I'm going to say leadership team. I think there's leaders that are more leader than me, but I am actively involved. I'm currently one of the moderators on the Z8 and Z9 forums and on the Wildlife Forum. And I'm the chair of the monthly wildlife photography contest. There are several contests that Nickonians runs on a monthly basis, and then the best of Nickonians on an annual basis. And I've taken over chair of that contest. Notice I don't enter contests, but that doesn't keep me from chairing contest. Oh, and by the way, I did make one exception on the not entering contest. I did recently enter a contest where the grand prize is a high-end wildlife lens, and that I couldn't pass that up. So I did enter. I'm trying to forget that I entered so that I don't have to get stressed out about it. So anyway, I mentioned I do some professional work. I have over the years. I do it by word of mouth. I'll do it if by word of mouth, I hear about something and get interested. And so these are some examples. You can see it's a pretty wide variety. I'll highlight a couple. The very first one that I did was the pictures of the models on the construction site over on the left side. A friend of mine was manager of an Avita product salon, a health and beauty salon, and they were having road construction in front of their salon and had this idea to hire models, dress in fancy clothes, do up their hair, and kind of juxtapose that with the construction equipment. And they hired 4 models and 3 professional photographers. And the idea was to create big poster size prints to put up in their shop and to use in some of their advertising. And on the day before the event, one of the photographers had to cancel. And I was friends with the manager of the shop, and she called me and said, "Could you please step in?" She knew I did some photography, and I really think, at the time, I think both her thought is kind of a filler. We've got 4 models. We need to keep them busy, and so have another photographer there to keep shooting. But it turned out, to my surprise, I was successful at it. I really enjoyed the experience. 2 of my pictures were selected in their final selections, and that was right in there with the professionals. One of the professionals also had 2 selected, and the other had 1 selected. So I felt pretty good. Got a lot of confidence to start doing some level of professional work. The only other one I'll highlight is over on the right side. There's 3 pictures there. This is a current job where I'm providing artwork for an office renovation for the lobby and for conference rooms. And these are 40 by 60 metal prints. And they made me a little bit nervous because one of the pictures, it was all from my existing stock. One of the pictures was pretty old and was taken on a 12 meg sensor. And I thought, 40 by 60, what's this going to look like? But it turned out beautiful. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. The client was really pleased. And so that's been a lot of fun. So anyway, yeah, I do a little bit of commercial work, but don't really look for it or go out of my way. So I've loved wildlife photography from the very beginning. And these are all photos, pretty much all from the very beginning. These are all film with the exception of one. So they're digitized from my film days. Taken in Africa and at various national parks in the US. The only digital one is the bear at the middle left, the black bear. That's a full-grown black bear that I ran across in Big Bend just before COVID, and was really pleased. The rangers were quite surprised when I got that picture. They're not sighted that often, but that was exciting. So all of the others on here are film, several of them from Africa, from various places there, and then various national parks, Rocky Mountain, Glacier, Grand Tetons. And almost from the very beginning, I've loved travel photography. And so these are just examples, England, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Belgium, Austria, Japan, India are all represented here. And I've missed some others. The only one I'm going to highlight on here is the sunset picture in the middle right. That was India, and that was taken with my wife's school pic. So that's my first foray into digital. So I had to include that photograph. So, how did things shift? Well, my kind of, I'm going to say, a regaining passion, that one thing has led to another, but a lot of it was brought on by COVID. I was, with a lot of other people, made to work from home, kind of locked down, not able to go far. I wasn't really traveling. And to keep my sanity, I went on long walks with my camera every day. And I was really blessed with a pair of scissortail flycatchers that decided to nest in a meadow near my home. And I don't put this picture up as any great photography. It was one of my first forays into bird photography. But I'd go out every day and look for these. And then pretty soon I started getting fascinated. They're beautiful when they're on the ground, but when they start to fly, oh my gosh. And so, whoops, before doing that, a friend of mine just sent me this, and I think it's a nice transition message. The credit is given there at the top, but this, I laughed when I saw it, and I said, yeah, maybe this is me. Somewhere along the way when you age, I don't know. But anyway, so I started with these scissortail flycatchers and just started taking their pictures every day and got really interested in what they look like when they fly And again, this is not an example of a really great image. I'm still pleased with it, but mostly because it's one of my first. It's got too much depth of field and too busy a background. It's not particularly sharp, but it was for me. This was a learning process during COVID, kind of self-teaching on uh, bird in flight photography and just getting to know birds a little bit more. So the one on the right on this next slide is working a little bit to make the background less busy, reduce my depth of field. And then I found that um, shooting up into the air. Now, for bird photographers, a lot of times we say, well, yeah, capture the bird in the air. You don't get much of a message. You don't really get a lot of context. But but scissor-tail flycatchers, they're just, it's all about the positions and they're doing ballet while they're looking for bugs. And so I really started enjoying just aiming the camera up into the air and getting pictures of them that way. And I even got a catch light in an eye now and again and got a fair amount of sharpness. Um, and these different wing and tail positions that I just really loved. So that got me started down a new path. And of course, with every new interest, you can spend more money. And this brought me back to mirrorless. I was looking at what capabilities I wanted to have, and found that the specs on the latest high-end mirrorless cameras were tremendous for what I wanted to do. And of course, a lot of people talk about higher frame rates and stuff. I'll talk about later. I don't use a lot of high frame rate, but for me, the biggest thing was an interest in the additional focus modes and the kind of machine learning generated subject detection and continually improving subject detection that you can get. And so the focus modes and subject detection were the first attraction for me. The other one was the absolute silence. And I can give a couple examples. Sitting in a bird blind and getting the excitement of a roadrunner in my part of the country coming up. Roadrunners are pretty skittish. They're fun to take pictures of, but that first time the shutter clicks and they hear it, they're likely to be gone. And with a soundless camera, I can sit and shoot roadrunners and watch their antics. An example not from me, I don't have a good bobcat picture, but a good friend was in a bird blind recently, waiting for birds, and a bobcat shows up. And she's just getting ready to take her pictures, and someone else in the blind shot with a DSLR, one click, and the bobcat was gone. And so, silence can be important, depends on a lot of species you can click all day and they're just fine, but others are really skittish. So, and I just generally like the complete silence. With my cameras, I can program in a sound. I do not. I like it fully silent. Um, of course, the other things, I was always shooting wildlife along the way, and I think in Linda's introduction, she mentioned that I also have an interest in motorsports. Kind of comes from my engineering side, and fairly long lenses, up to about 500 millimeters, are pretty attractive for motorsports. And so I had lenses on that to 500 millimeter focal length. But with birds, sometimes you want to go still longer. And with the new optics of these cameras, you can really rethink teleconverters. Oftentimes, photographers shied away from them for the loss of not only light but optical quality. With the new mirrorless cameras, you still have the light penalty, but oftentimes the sensors are good enough that you can operate at a bit lower light, and the optical quality is amazing. So yeah, I'll use teleconverters along with long lenses. Also during COVID, I started getting into birds, and we have a pretty nice local Audubon Center. I'm here in San Antonio, and the Mitchell Lake Audubon Center has a lake and a number of water basins, and then a whole bunch of land that's mixed woods and prairie. And so you get a lot of the small birds and the migratory birds, as well as a lot of shorebirds, ducks, and geese. And during the lockdown, it was another place I could go and be by myself and not worry about getting out. Um, so I will turn now to just several more recent examples of photography. These are both from Mitchell Lake Audubon Center. I love avocets and was fortunate in early morning light. I had the light behind me, and I will shoot because I like shooting shorebirds. So one of my key things is I want a camera that I can easily shoot in portrait mode. So my primary camera is a Z9, and I'm turning it in portrait mode all the time. And to get these avocets in the early morning light, I always describe avocets as birds that God put the beaks on upside down. There's not many birds that have their beaks curved that direction. I think avocets, and there's just like one other. But I was pleased with that. The photograph on the right, snowy egret. Background was a little messy, and so I decided to shoot it high key. This one gets ordered a lot for print. It's a popular, probably one of my most popular photos, I guess. Um, I love this picture. It's again taken at Mitchell Lake. Black-bellied whistling duck had just taken off and flew right towards me. I got a whole series, but this was my favorite shot. I loved the angle and the water coming off its foot. And so this is a fun one. But one of the reasons I put it in here is this was taken with a 500 millimeter lens and a 1.7 teleconverter. And so it I felt worked quite nicely. So a couple more of these again, Mitchell Lake Audubon Center, fulvous whistling duck. When you don't have any breeze, the basins become just mirror smooth, and so you can get some really nice reflections. And this fulvous whistling duck was wanting to show me its blue foot. They got really cool blue feet, blue beaks. And so he's showing off a foot. And again, I'm shooting in portrait mode to be sure to get the full reflection. Um, and then I've got an American white pelican. We get a lot of those. And one morning, I was able to set up. They were just a huge number of them were coming in one after another, coming into the lake. And I was able to set up so they were flying towards me. And I've got all kinds of shots coming straight towards me. And then they were banking to their right just before they'd land. So I got some shots that way. Here's a straight towards me, although I have to be careful with this. This was not Mitchell Lake. This was actually taken along the Texas coast near Port Aransas. Here's an immature white ibis, and looking for a landing. Again, this was taken near Port Aransas, a pond full of ducks, and he's trying to find a clean spot to land. And then a mature white ibis at the same lake, coming in for a landing. So I've got a lot of pictures in here, a lot of different stuff. So I'm trying to keep things moving. So we've got a turn, just getting ready to dive in and find something in the water. I got the sequence, and there's pictures with just the tips of the wing out of the water where it's swimming along, and two wingtips are up. And then we've got a roseate spoonbill on takeoff, coming right towards me. I was fortunate for that one. This was back in Mitchell Lake fairly recently. I always think it's a good fortune when I get a bird to fly towards me, and to get this American kestrel that had just taken off and flew towards me before veering to its left. I was quite pleased to get that picture. While, as I'll talk about a little in another slide or two, I really have developed a primary interest in shorebirds. But I'm finding, as I explore around and look at ways that don't involve a lot of hiking and that I can do near where I live, I've come across a couple of bird ranches. And these are taken at a bird ranch in Uvalde, which is just a little over an hour away from me. This was in the spring during the migration. It's a female painted bunting on the left, and then a Lincoln sparrow and reflection on the right. And last week, our speaker was Ruth Hoyt, and I've also gone, she hosts at a bird ranch down in the valley, and I've been down there as well. I don't have any pictures from that, but my website is filled with them. And I've organized a lot of the pictures by location. So there's a whole gallery from the Uvalde Ranch and also the ranch that Ruth White is hosts. Wait a minute. Puffins. How did I get puffins? um, I still travel. When I can, I still travel. Yep, these are puffins. And my wife and I had the opportunity a little over a year ago to go to Norway, and we reserved places on a boat touring the Stappen Nature Reserve, or Stappen, I think they say, near Jesvær, Norway. I've tried to put it on the map. This is way up in the north of the mainland of Norway. The detailed map at upper left is where we took off from the boat. We actually came to Honningsvåg and then took a bus over to Jesvær and got on a boat to tour this nature reserve. And you can see a lot from boats, and that's a lot of what I do now, where I don't, I'm not able to hike as far, but I can get on a boat and be able to see things that way. The bigger map in the middle then just shows kind of where this is in Norway. So that's the northern part of Norway where it comes around the top. Hammersfest is right near there, and then a little bit to the southwest, and then going south and east, Kirkenes is right at the Russian border. So that's where we are. We're near the North Cape in Norway, and went out on a boat exploring little islands and what have you, and seeing what birds we could find. So here's a razorbill with lunch. I enjoyed this. Locally, they refer to these as penguins. They are not at all related to penguins, but you can see by the look. They really kind of look like a penguin, but they fly really, really well. And they're not related at all to penguins. But they are, I think, related to puffins, actually. A little more aerodynamic looking, but they both tend to fly way up high in the sky. There's northern gannet. Of course, we see those in a lot of northern countries. I've always been tempted whether I should Photoshop out the little speck and I've kept it in there. That's a puffin. Out of focus because it's so much higher. Those puffins go way up. And so I was photographing the gannet, but the puffins were all over, and that's what's up above the northern gannet. Here's a sea eagle. There were a lot of sea eagles there, which I believe is the largest species of eagle. They're also called whitetail eagles. And that again is, I believe, a puffin behind it. And these, I can never remember what these are. They're related to seagulls. They're black-legged kittiwakes. And so I put its name on the bottom because I couldn't remember. I thought I'd better stick it on the slide. But they are in the seagull family. I'm going to take another back away from the photographs and talk a little bit more about, okay, so I'm zeroing in on birds. I've kind of changed a lot of my emphases. But as I get into birds, how am I really going to approach this? Because it could soon turn into a whole bunch of travel. And so I've decided, no, I'm not going that route. A lot of birders have their bucket list of trying to see as many species as they can, go after the rare ones. And, birding is, I believe, like the fastest growing hobby right now, or it has been for a few years. And it's also one of the most expensive hobbies, if not the most expensive, depends on who you talk to and how they collect their data. But where's the expense in birding? It's in the travel. It's going all over the world to try and get a bird that we haven't seen before, and that might be kind of rare. I'm not in a position to be able to do that. So I don't have a bird bucket list. I want to emphasize what I can learn about close to home. And I am fortunate in South Texas. It's really a birding center, both for migratory birds as well as the shorebirds and what have you. So I want to emphasize what I can learn close to home. I still hike, but my hikes are a lot shorter. My big trips are fewer and further between. Um, I have, as I've started taking pictures of birds, I have found that I have a primary interest in shorebirds, and I'm going to leave that fairly loosely defined. As soon as I get near the water, I find enjoying that. And I'm zeroing in on particular birds that I want to learn, delve deeply into those birds. And with that, I'm all in for whooping cranes. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, a little background on these birds. Of course, there's about, I think there's 15 species of cranes worldwide. We have two native species in North America, and ironically, they are the most common, which is the sandhill crane, and the most rare, which is the whooping crane. The whooping crane, if I move to the map on the right-hand side and just kind of describe that a little bit, if you start with the various shaded regions, the regions with all the black dots on those, that's the historic range. And the whooping cranes would winter in Mexico and all along the Gulf Coast in Texas, Louisiana, over to Florida, and then up the eastern seaboard of the Atlantic coast, the southern states there, all filled with whooping cranes. And then they would breed and nest in a big swath that ran through the Midwestern United States and up into central Canada. But whooping cranes have pretty interesting feathers, and they made hats. And I'm not sure what other reasons we can come up with for the demise of the whooping crane, but they were hunted almost to extinction, probably closer to extinction than just about anything that has made some comeback. In the 1940s, there were less than 20 known whooping cranes in the world, in North America, really. They are only native to North America, and there were only 3 breeding females. So we were pretty sure we were going to lose them at that point in the 1940s. At that point, we didn't know. The only place they were showing up in the US was in a very small region north of Corpus Christi in Texas on the Gulf Coast. And they'd show up every winter, arrive in about November, stay through about March. And we honestly, in the 1940s, nobody knew where they went. We figured they went north. That's all anybody knew. It wasn't until 1951 that the breeding grounds and the nesting grounds was discovered. It was discovered by air on the border of Manitoba and the Northwest Territories in Canada. At that time, or really starting in the 1940s and then in the 50s when this was discovered, there was a really good partnership between the US and Canada on trying to save the whooping cranes. And Canada protected their region as Wood Buffalo National Park. Now, it took so long to find that because it is inaccessible. It is thousands of acres of marshland. There are no roads that go to it. It would be pretty difficult to hike and canoe to it. It's marshland. It's a lot of bog that just doesn't support either boat or walking. So it's only accessible really by helicopter. But Canada did protect that region, and they watch it really closely. And in the 1940s, under the Franklin Roosevelt administration, the land where the whooping cranes was showing up in Texas was purchased from private owners. It had been purchased by developers because it's coastal land, but it's very marshy, and I don't think they were too torn up about selling it. But the federal government acquired the land. I'm going to say bought the land. I don't know the exact details, but bought several thousand acres to make the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, which started in the 1940s. That is the only natural migratory path for whooping cranes. In the 1940s, as I say, there were less than 20 birds, 3 breeding females. It wasn't much better in the 60s. I first learned about whooping cranes in the 4th grade when our teacher read us a story. At the time, there were about 30 birds. In this population today, it's relatively stable at about 500 birds. Now, because it's all in that one area, there's been some effort to try and reintroduce whooping cranes into other areas. And whooping cranes, when they lay their eggs up in Wood Buffalo National Park, they typically lay two eggs, but they lay them almost a week apart. And the first one hatches, and the colts, the chick is referred to as a colt. Um, they grow so fast that in that 1 week, the parents are paying attention to that chick and they ignore the second one. And when it hatches, the odds are it's going to starve or a predator's going to get it. They're very, very seldom do you see a whooping crane family that has two colts. Um, so the scientists said if we're going to try and protect these birds, we're going to steal the second eggs. And so we're not really affecting the population, but we're going to incubate those eggs or whatever. And the first thing they tried was actually to put them with sandhills. There's a sandhill migratory region between Bosque del Apache. A lot of you have talked about that before in New Mexico. And then they go north to Gray Lake National Wildlife Refuge, Gray's Lake in Idaho. And they started trying to put whooping crane eggs in with the sandhills. And lo and behold, the sandhills would raise them. And they thought, success. The problem was the whooping cranes thought they were sandhills. They never recognized one another. And so there's some stories of interbreeding. I'm not sure how much is really true of that, but they actually got the whooping cranes back out of that population before things would get weird. So more recently, there's been an effort to incubate the eggs and then take the chicks and introduce them in Wisconsin at Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, shown on the map there. And they would actually dress up as cranes. The people would get in costume as cranes and feed the chicks and get them all acclimated. And then they used an ultralight to teach migration. And that was done for several years, and it was considered quite successful. Ultralight flies at about the right speed, and they taught them a migratory path from central Wisconsin to Florida on the Gulf Coast. And the birds learned the migration paths. And so, wow, success. However, it's non-self-sustaining. There has only been one case known so far of breeding, of actually a chick hatched in the wild from that population. So they've stopped using the ultralights, but they're still supplying incubated, chicks raised, colts raised through incubation, supplied into the north one. And they don't need the ultralights because the birds all know to migrate and the new ones follow along. So it's, as I say, partially successful, not self-sustaining, but we do have another group. Today, as I say, there's about 500 in the original path. There are a few non-migratory whooping cranes along the Louisiana coast, and there's now about 200 in the introduced migratory flight path that I described. And that takes us to a little over 700 birds. And I said there's about 800. The rest are in captivity, mostly at zoos. Anyway, that might be more than you wanted to know about whooping cranes, but it's really central to what I've gotten interested in. I mentioned my fourth grade experience, and that really stuck with me. And so I'd always thought about that, those 30 whooping cranes growing to several hundred. I'm from Wisconsin. I mentioned I worked with the University of Wisconsin. I moved here about 11 years ago. When I lived in Wisconsin, I lived 20 miles from the International Crane Foundation. And so I'm pretty closely connected with cranes generally, but always with the whooping cranes. My son-in-law, one of my sons-in-law, is a curator with the Wisconsin Historical Society. And last summer, he acquired one of the ultralights for the museum. So we've got another connection that's going to be displayed in the State Historical Society Museum. There's a picture of it there with some whooping cranes following it. And then at this point, I also want to mention Elise Bender. I believe she's been a speaker on the Happiness Hour, and many of you or several of you know her. I know Linda's a good friend of hers. I met Elise a couple of years ago. She goes by Bender, but I have trouble remembering to say that. So anyway, I met her in San Antonio. She used to live in San Antonio. I met her a couple of years ago, and we've really become good friends. It's been a delightful friendship, and we stay in pretty close touch. And our friendship grew out of a shared passion for the whooping cranes. Her passion, she spent a lot of time in Japan, and her passion begins kind of with the cranes over, with the Japanese cranes. But she's all in for whooping cranes as well. And she got me turned on to where's the best places to view them at Aransas. And the first trip I took with her was also Lori Cash was along. I think Lori's been a speaker here. She's a professional wildlife photographer from Virginia. I invited her to join us, but I wasn't able to see the screen. So I don't know if she did. But
She's in here.
Is she?
I
All
think
right.
I think she's in here. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, I invited her because we met on my first trip to Aransas with Elise Bender, and so we go by boat. And I've made several trips. As a matter of fact, I just got back Monday from a trip that I made myself with introducing a couple of other people to it. So Bender still offers. She's moved to Las Vegas, and I think she'll be moving again. Her husband is career military, and I believe they're moving to Germany. It sounds like, but she's still, she's a professional wildlife photographer. She's a Tamron ambassador, and she still does. She does tours through Wildside, and she will continue to do whooping crane tours in the winter in December. So if people are interested, I'll throw in that go to her website and get more information. A few pictures from whooping cranes. This is a family unit taken at Aransas. This was actually taken on that first trip when I was with Elise and with Lori Cash, and so this is a family unit. It's really impossible to tell the male and female apart, the adult birds, except sometimes by behavior. But even that, unless you were at the nesting grounds, you probably wouldn't be able to tell by behavior and watching them. The colts are they start out in kind of a real pretty golden tan kind of color. They start kind of dark, almost cinnamon, and then they keep getting lighter, and they start getting a little mottled by the time they come down. They were born in Canada, and they come down in about November. And as they spend the several months in Texas, they get lighter and lighter. So this was a December picture, and this is taken at Aransas National Wildlife Refuge from a boat. And Anyway, I was pleased to get that with all three birds, but some separation, a little bit of separation between them. When they first arrive, their primary food is wolfberries, as shown on the left, and blue crab. The wolfberries, they kind of run out of that supply pretty quick, but think of that as a protein energy drink. They just arrived from Canada from a really long flight. By the way, the other place you'll see them is along the North Platte River in Nebraska. As they pass through, that's a big stopping grounds. There's food and everything, and so some people will have seen them there. Although there's a lot of false sightings where people will see sandhills and and say they're whooping cranes. The blue crabs continue, and they spend most of their time hunting for those when they're in Texas. So the bigger picture there is one I took in a December picture, and then I took the one that's at lower right on Sunday this week. And I ran into a group of three that found the mother load of crabs. They were just going in and getting one crab after another. So I got a lot of pictures of them doing that. So here's another just picture of one in flight. And then a sunrise picture. They sleep in the water on their leg, standing up on their legs. It gives them protection. They go off just a little ways into the water, and then they're up at sunrise, making their way out. So it's nice when you're photographing them, get there before sunrise. And you can get there as the birds are making their way to the feeding grounds and kind of waking up and moving around. So you can get some nice sunrise kind of pictures as well. Um, and then I include this one. It's not tack sharp or anything, but I was on the boat, and this one came by at kind of eye level, and I was shooting with an 800 millimeter lens. It was actually a 100 to 400 with a 2 times teleconverter on it. And I won't tell you how many frames I have that aren't fully, don't capture the full bird, but I got one frame that where I just squeezed the bird in and got the whole bird as it flew right by. So it's just kind of a fun image. And then this is one I was really pleased to get this image. I got this on Monday or on Sunday this week, and the bird was getting ready to take off. And these are the largest flying birds by weight and by height. I don't know if it's in the world or in North America. You know, we got the condors, which have bigger wing spread, but these are in terms of weight and height, these are the biggest flying birds. And so they've got to make a bit of effort to get going. And when they're starting from the water, they're kind of running on the water as they get started. And so I just got that picture this week. So, just a little bit of a summary of my approach to shooting, because it is a little bit different. These are all things I've kind of learned on my own. As they say, I shoot with Nikon, the Z9 and Z8. They're both very, very similar in the way they're set up and everything. Most people, you know, when you get more serious about photography, we tend to shoot manual. And I did when I shot DSLR, I always shot manual. I've actually moved back to aperture priority. And I've done it for the reason that the camera can be programmed to put ISO on the lens ring. So there's 2 lens rings, of course. It depends on the lens, but most of the Nikon Z lenses have a second ring that you can program. So one of the rings is the focus ring for override. And the second lens ring can be programmed. And, you know, back in the old days, we always had an aperture on those rings. And when you buy the camera, the base setting is aperture, but I set it to ISO. And by doing that, what I can do is turn the lens ring and simultaneously watch my ISO and shutter speed. So I pick my aperture, typically as wide open as I can get, and unless I want more depth of field for some reason. But then I can, with one adjustment, simultaneously keep always conscious of what frame speed I need for my shooting and what ISO I'm going to need. And the other neat thing that does, so instead of having 2 adjustments to always think about, I've got the 2 together and I can watch them. And then the other thing is that when I'm in aperture priority, it activates something called easy exposure compensation. And I just love that feature. It puts on the back dial, the control wheel, it puts the exposure compensation. So, you know, plus or minus whatever. And in manual, you don't get that. You know, that's eliminated. You don't do exposure compensation. You do that with your settings. You know, but it gives me one more control where I can look at the histogram. I can look at whatever metering mode that I'm set in, and I can do a further adjustment using the rear wheel. And so that's what it's kind of new to me, but I've been doing it now really since I got the Z9, and I was one of the first to get it. I knew I wanted it, and I ordered it as soon as it was available, or as soon as it was announced. And I don't do a lot of focus mode switching. A lot of people take all of their function buttons and do different focus modes so they can hop from one to another. Of course, when I first got the camera, I started looking at all the different ones, finding out what I liked. But then what I do is I use my photo shooting banks to set a primary exposure mode. And then I use the custom settings banks to set a single secondary mode that I put on both my function 1 and function 3 buttons. I might be getting into a little too much detail unless you happen to use the same camera, but that gives me the same location for both landscape and portrait mode. And as I mentioned, I turn to portrait mode quite a lot. And so what I do is I decide what focus mode I want initially. And so let's say I'm doing birds in flight, and I'm going to use an area where I can capture the bird adequately. But then what I might do is set my custom settings to be able to put my to have a second focus mode as a spot focus or a single point. And that way, if the bird lands and there's a bit of leaves and or anything, and I'm trying, it gets into something, I can hit a function button and adjust to that second mode. And I can pick any two modes, but that's the way I do it. I just use two modes and pick my two as I start shooting, and have one as my primary and then one that I hit the uh, FN1 or FN3 for. So again, maybe more detail than most of you want, but if you're shooting with the same cameras, you'll maybe appreciate or understand what I'm trying to do. I do shoot primarily handheld. I do sometimes use a tripod with a gimbal head for bird photography, but they're just, where is the action going to be and moving around to it. So I do shoot mostly handheld. I do really love that the new lenses are quite light, and I shoot a lot of bird photography with the 800 millimeter phase Fresnel lens, which is an incredibly light lens, and it's a f6.3. So it's got pretty good light, and so that tends to be a go-to lens. A lot of bird photographers will shoot the fastest bursts they can, and that I don't. And I know I give up shots by doing that. I know I'm not getting the perfect wing position. Sometimes I get a bird with its eyes closed. I'm willing to take that chance. I find that I'm really trying to get to know my subjects. And if I'm shooting in bursts, I'm just kind of generally pointing the camera at them and hitting the shutter button. And I find that if I keep it in single shot and only take a shot when I want to, I start anticipating wing position. I anticipate what the bird's going to do. And I feel like I'm learning more. And so I once in a while, if there's a lot of flying action and stuff, I'll maybe go to a burst mode. But by far, my majority is just single shot. And then I've talked about several times, I use a lot of portrait orientation. I shoot tall birds, and it's real nice to flip it over to portrait mode and get the whole bird in that way. So that was kind of a key for me with the Z9, is having the built-in um, uh, the vertical mode, the additional button, and the bigger battery and stuff that comes with it. So I'm going to close with one other subject. I think I'm okay on time. I'm probably running a little bit over. But one other thing I've just been playing around with, and it's pretty new to me, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm calling it bird bits. With an 800 millimeter lens, sometimes you get so close to the birds that you can only get pieces of them. And I don't use the 800 all the time. If I know I'm going to be close, I tend to go back to a zoom and something with a little bit less focal length. But I started playing around with it. It was kind of somewhat by accident that I've got the 800 on a camera and I point it and I only get a little bit of the bird, but then I get really fascinated by a feather pattern, or just kind of how the neck and the body are curled. This is a flamingo picture, and you can see part of the neck and part of the wing feathers. And I love the bright colors of it. But I'm having some fun with this, and I was actually inspired by Bill Brandt. If any of you follow some of the different historic photographers, Bill Brandt is a German photographer that worked a lot from England and does a lot. He does a lot of different things, but he does a lot of people photographs where he's looking at just the parts of people and making an abstract. And so most of the pictures on here, the one of my left there, because it's one of his kind of more famous pictures in the upper left, but all the others are bits of people that are kind of made as abstracts. And if you look at it close, you can figure out what it really is. But he's playing with shapes and everything. Now, he worked entirely in black and white. Um, and I'll put one more little comment on there. I've got the gravestone over on. I don't mean to be morbid, but my great grandfather is Bill Brandt, not the same Bill Brandt, but But I thought it was a good connection. And he was originally Wilhelm Brandt, came over from Germany. Anyway, I got interested in Bill Brandt's photography, and that's kind of how I started playing with this with the long lens. Just started playing with the bird bit. Of course, he worked almost entirely in black and white, and so I started doing it in black and white. So here's another flamingo picture. I actually went to the zoo in San Antonio where they have a flamingo breeding program there. And so I spent a lot of time with a long lens with close-up flamingos, taking pictures of parts, and was initially working in black and white. And then I said, wait a minute, these are flamingos. Let's not give up the colors. And so I've started, kind of deviated from the inspiration I got from Bill Brandt's work and went back into color. And this is actually a flamingo as well. I think it's a Chilean flamingo, and it's very different. It's got a little bit of the pink, but different coloring. And just trying to look at these patterns and kind of build the art of the different pieces of the birds. And then what I've been doing with it is, and this is kind of my vision at this point, is that I'll get pieces from different birds, not the same bird, but probably, at least for now, I'm sticking with the same breed. But another thing about getting older, you get grandkids, and I've got grandkids. I like showing them bird things. And so I started thinking about this bird bits thing, and I could have some fun with taking different bits, making photographs, and then putting them together and kind of a mix and match. And so I need more bird pictures to fill out the birds, but this next one is getting pretty filled out. And that's not the same bird. That's pieces from a whole bunch of different birds. If you look closely, you can see, yeah, coloring's different, feather patterns are different. They're all flamingo, but I could envision, printing these and hanging them on a wall just like this, with maybe just a few more to fill it out. So this is my latest project, if you will, and I'm pretty early on in it, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. So that concludes what I had put together. So thank you all very much for your attention.
Breathe, breathe. Okay, so let me get you to take down your presentation. I'm going to run through real quick. Lots of comments. I don't see any questions in here, which is not a bad thing. A lot of nice comments. So I'm definitely going to share this chat with you. So my takeaway, Kevin, is that you and I are going to go bird shooting because I have a Nikon Z9 and I don't know how to use it.
Oh, well, I'd be delighted.
Again, welcome to Linda's Selfish Hour. This is always a bonus. So, yeah, when you were talking about the photo banks, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, he knows how to use the photo banks. This is going to work out great. So, a couple of things. I'm glad that you did not, because we kind of talked about you skipping the bird bits. And I'm like, no, just don't. So I'm glad that you didn't, because I think that was the fun part for me, was like, wait a minute, is that the same bird? And it was not. So that could be a lot of fun, actually. Crazy fun, but with a drinking game, that could be a lot of fun.
Oh, the sky's the limit on what you can do with this.
It kind of is. And I think that too, it's that creativity of, you can do whatever the heck you want with it, and maybe it makes sense to you, maybe it doesn't make sense to somebody else. Who cares? But what a fun thing. There's a question in here. Sue Pitts is so her question is, what is a photo bank?
Oh, okay. It's the way the Nikon cameras, at least, and not all the Nikon cameras, but the D5, D6, D850, and the Z8 and Z9 have what are called photo banks, and I might have the title exactly wrong. I think it's called shooting banks, and then custom setting banks. And there's 4 of each, and they're programmable. And you can, most people take both banks and name them the same and say night photography or sports photography. And then they keep all their settings, everything in the camera. How would I have it set for sports photography, let's say? And they do both the shooting bank and the custom settings bank, and they'll name them and move them together. I find I don't use a lot of the different settings. I was, and one of the things, you, of course, one of the things you set in the bank, you set what mode you're going to shoot in, whether it's, aperture or shutter priority or manual or whatever. And you set a lot of your basic settings, including focus area mode. And whether you want to focus before release or let it release whenever you push the shutter button. Those are things you can set in the photo shooting bank. And so that's where I set my primary um, uh, focus mode. But then because I'm not using the banks for a lot of other things, I just pick four primary modes and set my four banks for those different modes. And then the custom settings banks can be selected separately. You don't have to select them the same. And so I select those for four more shooting bank or four more focus area modes. And what I do with those is that's where you can set your programmed buttons, the programmable buttons, the function buttons. And so that's what I do is then use those banks to set my function buttons to give me a second focus mode. And so by doing that, when I go out on a shoot, depending if I'm on water or land, what kind of bird, am I expecting it to fly a lot or am I expecting it to stay in the bush? Or am I shooting something other? I don't just shoot birds. I've just gotten pretty fascinated by them. But at the beginning of a trip or at the beginning of a shooting day, I'll decide what do I think I want as my primary mode. I'll set my photo shooting bank to get that. And then what do I want to be able to jump to quickly? And I'm using my custom settings bank to do that. And that way it's on both the FN1 and FN3 buttons, which are the handiest buttons for horizontal in the FN1, and then the FN3 is exactly the same position when you've rotated the camera. So it's a different way to use the banks, but it was once I understood the banks and what I could do with them, it's what I found I really like.
Yeah, I know that she shoots a Z. I believe she's got a Z6, so I don't know if the photo banks are
They have a
unique.
different approach on those, and that's those different.
Mm-hmm.
There's the U1, 2, and I think it's U1 and 2 on the top. And that's conceptually, it's kind of the same, but how they get saved and changed is different. And I've not worked with that camera, so.
Okay. Yeah, I have I have access to all that, and I get confused. My little short-term memory doesn't do so well with those banks, but I know that I'm not fully utilizing my camera. So that group that you call yourselves the Niconians, they're probably like,
Yes.
oh man, take the camera away from her. But
Oh, no, no, no. There's no question too simple. That's one of the wonderful things about Nikkei.
well,
They're
yeah, so I
they're
definitely
very,
need
very helpful.
I need to get on that website. All right, Kevin, first of all, thank you for doing this and thank you for
Oh,
not
my
saying
pleasure.
no. I really appreciate it because we all have our buckets of photos and we can post one here and there, but it's really kind of cool to get your kind of the stories like all in one place. And it gave me kind of an insight to where you started and where you're going. And the end part is you're not done yet. You're still playing with, you know,
Absolutely.
there's
Learning,
somebody
learning
in
every
here.
day.
Yeah, we're learning every day. So maybe you're not hiking the big mountains anymore. And maybe there is nothing wrong with shooting birds from a boat because I've done it many times and I
Oh,
will do it
I
many more
love it.
times. Yeah, so this was kind of a nice presentation for us to and actually I think somebody else said it. We learned more about whooping cranes in this one session than I had no
Maybe
clue.
more
So
than you wanted to know,
maybe
but
more,
it's
but
part of my
maybe
passion.
it is. And I have seen the whooping cranes from a distance. I've never really gotten good shots of them, and so that was kind of cool to see. And um you may have inspired me to give it one more try. So I might have to find some
I'll
time
be
next.
glad to rent the boat with you. Let's find two more people.
I just turned down an invitation just a couple of weeks ago. I was like, nope, been there, done that, but maybe I might have to reconsider it. All
Yeah.
right, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your story. Next week, Samantha Mahanta will be here to properly pronounce his name, but he's going to be here to share his presentation, U.S. National Parks, What Ignited My Passion for Photography and Travel. And please come and watch his presentation because his photos are fantastic. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.